Hello everyone, I am the Bearded Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from All Will Be One, Drivnod Carnage Dominus. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support your channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck text, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Drivnod is an 8/3 Phyrexian horror for 3 generic and 2 black. This alone makes it a 3-turn clock. If that weren't enough, it can get an indestructible counter for 2 Phyrexian black mana and exiling 3 creatures from our graveyard. While that's easy to achieve in this deck with the Aristocrats strategies, it further synergizes with the Aristocrats strategies because it doubles death triggers. The deck aims to make the most of this, as well as having a slight Voltron strategy sprinkled in. So let's see some of the deck's Voltron effects before we go over the main Aristocrat strategies. That's because even the Voltron aspect of the deck has overlap with the Aristocrat aspect. In this case, Cultists of the Absolute and Eternal Thirst do some epic work here. The background turns Drivnod into a 2-turn clock while giving it evasion and ward. It does require sacrificing a creature at the beginning of our upkeep, but the deck wants our creatures dying anyways, especially with Eternal Thirst. Gaining life is very useful for the deck since a lot of abilities require paying life. However, thanks to Drivnod's doubling effect, it'll get 2+1/+1 counters on it each time an opponent's creature dies, which will be quite often. Rogue's Passage is included to guarantee Drivnod gets through because sometimes flying isn't enough. Again, it's a 3-turn clock on its own, but with slight pumps it can go from 2 to 1 very easily. Champion's Helm, Commander's Plate, Lightning Greaves, and Swiftfoot Boots are the final Voltron pieces of the deck, but they can also be used to protect other key creatures in the deck, especially both pairs of footwear. But for the most part, Drivnod is the main reason for them. Commander damage is a very viable win con with the deck, especially when we're clearing the board for Drivnod to get through or using the Voltron pieces just shown. However, we can also win by 1,000 cuts thanks to classic Aristocrat effects doubled by Drivnod. Agent of the Iron Throne, Massacre Worm, Sir Conrad the Grim, Bastion of Remembrance, the Meathook Massacre, Vindictive Vampire, and Zulaport Cutthroat all trigger off of creatures dying, dealing damage or life loss to all opponents. Well, some trigger off of any creature, while others depend on who controls this creature. But the end result is the same. Opponents lose double the life thanks to our commander. Massacre Worm and the Meathook Massacre are especially useful since they can also function as board wipes. While the Worm only gives -2 to toughness, it might not clear the entire board, but at least it's one-sided in our favor. Also, since it has an enter the battlefield trigger, we can sacrifice it for value and then reanimate it afterwards to do it again. But we'll see those reanimation effects later. The Meathook Massacre also has the added bonus of gaining us life whenever a creature an opponent controls dies. But it only takes life away when it's our own creatures dying. Just like Agent of the Iron Throne, Bastion of Remembrance, Vindictive Vampire, and Zulaport Cutthroat. While these only trigger whenever a creature we control dies, we're still getting the double trigger from our commander. Best of all, with the exception of the background, we're gaining life too, which is great. Sir Conrad is the only one of these that doesn't care who controlled the creature or even where it came from. Was it discarded or milled? He triggers. Was it exiled from a graveyard? He triggers. However, keep in mind that Drivnod will only double his trigger on the creature dying. Exquisite Blood solves the problem for the effects that don't gain us life, but we're also gaining life whenever our opponents lose life for whatever reason. Are they attacking each other? We gain life. Are they paying life for spells and abilities? We gain life. Whenever our creatures deal damage to them, we gain life. This card does draw a lot of hate though because of Sanguine Bond, the other half of an infinite loop combo. While I am not running Sanguine Bond in this deck, this combo got quite old for me a long time ago. You can run it if you want to, since it will give you an immediately win quite consistently. The deck has so many ways to initiate the loop that once you control both enchantments, you'll win if uninterrupted. But for what the deck wants to do, Exquisite Blood is good enough. Plus, it paints a huge target on itself, attracting all sorts of removal that would otherwise be spent on our other enchantments and permanents. Grey Merchant of Asphodel and Kokusho the Evening Star also have the potential to combo off or win slowly but surely due to their respective enter the battlefield and death triggers. Grey Merchant of Asphodel drains a ton of life when it enters the battlefield, so we can sacrifice it for value and then reanimate it later. Kokusho triggers on dying, so Drivnod doubles that, and, as with other value creatures, can be reused via reanimation. It's also a significant beater while alive, too. Speaking of reanimation, let's see how we can continue getting value from all of these creatures we're sacrificing. Hell's Caretaker and Whisper Blood Liturgist are amazing here because they're both sacrifice outlets as well as reanimation effects. Hell's Caretaker can only be activated in our upkeep, but it's still a 1-to-1 trade. Imagine revolving between Grey Merchant of Asphodel and Kokocho the Evening Star each time. So good. Whisper is a 2-for-1 trade but can be done at instant speed, which is amazing for doing in response to blocks, at the end of a turn, in response to removal, etc. Bloodsoaked Champion, Gravecrawler, Another Trader, and Reassembling Skeleton are amazing with these effects since they have built-in ways to get back to the battlefield, essentially self-reanimating. Gravecrawler in particular is part of an infinite combo which is in the deck because it's not as consistent or immediate as the 2 enchantments loop mentioned earlier. But these are amazing for all sacrifice outlets too, not just Hell's Caretaker and Whisper. Phyrexian Reclamation and Witch's Cottage don't reanimate per se, but they do help recover creatures from the graveyard. The enchantment does it without needing creatures, which is great when you have an empty board and the mana and life to spare. The land doesn't even take up a slot in the deck and will enter the battlefield untapped way more often than not. Mimic Vat and Saw in Half are sort of reanimation effects, but they're not getting the actual creature card back. Mimic Vat imprints the creature that died, and you can then get a token of whatever it was when you activate it. This is absolutely crazy with enter the battlefield triggers, whether on your opponent's creatures or at the very least Grey Merchant of Asphodel. Saw in Half is absolutely ridiculous in the deck when used on our creature. Not only are we killing a creature, but we're getting it back twice, so we can double up on our life drain effects. And since the original goes to the graveyard, we can reanimate it later, and an instant speed too. Speaking of tokens, Mirrex, Springjack Pasture, and Westville Abbey are included for not taking up slots in the deck. They enter untapped and can tap for mana. The deck being mono black means that the colorless mana isn't an issue. But, more importantly, we can create tokens to help fuel any Aristocrat strategies if we have no creatures to sacrifice. These lands are amazing. Especially the Abbey, since it can transform into Ormendal Profane Prince, a 9/7 legendary demon with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. Definitely nothing to scoff at. This further fuels the potential for aggroing out with the deck. As a bonus, we have to sacrifice 5 creatures to transform into him, which is a great sacrifice outlet. Most of the deck's card advantage, interaction, and mana acceleration are also synergistic in order to have amazing engines with overlapping pieces that can do a bunch of things with multiples or even just one trigger. You know I have to include my favorite mono black enchantments, Dictate of Erebos and Grave Pact. Thanks to our commander, these trigger twice whenever one of our creatures die. So you know these were the first 2 cards I put into this deck. As a bonus, the Dictate has Flash, so you can also keep mana open and then cast it at the end of the turn before ours. Attrition is another amazing enchantment for the deck since it's a sacrifice outlet that serves as interaction. Granted, you can only hit non-black creatures, but it's only 1 black mana to activate. The deck is still running generic interaction though, like Damnation, Decree of Pain, and Toxic Deluge to wipe the board. Sometimes the board just needs wiping. Fortunately, if we're wiping our own board, we'll still get all of those death triggers. In fact, sometimes that's enough for opponents to not use their own board wipes. They might die to the Aristocrat effects if they do. Scour from Existence is included for that one of permanent that might need getting rid of at instant speed. Mono black doesn't do well against every permanent type unlike green, but this is good enough. Ujukabag is included for those opposing graveyard decks. Last thing we need is to be doing anyone else favors while we're running our engines. Plus, it doesn't even take up a slot on the deck, so there's no excuse to not run it otherwise. Dark Prophecy, Grim Haruspex, Liliana Dreadhorde General, Midnight Reaper, and Harvester of Souls are amazing synergistic card advantage cards. Just keep in mind when they trigger, since some only trigger off of our own creatures, or the creatures have to be non-token, etc. Liliana also has other uses besides her triggered ability, so she can create tokens by gaining 1 loyalty, which is great for the deck. Even better is her -4 ability, which has the entire table sacrifice 2 creatures, which is busted as hell here. Her ultimate is not the goal of running her, but can be quite backbreaking when used, depending on the situation. Ayara First of Loch Twain and Yawgmoth Ram Physician provide card advantage with their sacrifice ability. While Ayara requires tapping, unlike Yawgmoth, she does have a life drain trigger whenever another black creature enters the battlefield under our control. Yawgmoth is also useful to help get rid of creatures along with drawing us the card, which is great, especially since he also has a built-in way to proliferate. The deck doesn't have many counters to be proliferated, but those +1/+1 counters, -1/-1 counters, loyalty counters, and others are still good to proliferate if we can. Vogar, Necropolis Tyrant, Mask of Gristlebrand, and Skull Clamp are some more ways of drawing cards off of death triggers. And, speaking of +1/+1 counters, our commander isn't the only one getting big with its enchantments. Vogar can get absolutely massive since it's getting twice as many +1/+1 counters if we control Drivnod when it triggers. If that weren't enough, it also has Menace. Then, when it dies, it draws us into a ridiculous amount of cards. Same with Mask of the Gristlebrand. When equipped to a huge creature, this thing gains us a ton of life. But then, when that creature dies, we can pay X life to draw X cards. Keep in mind though, with Drivnod in play, if you want to double this trigger, you have to pay X life twice. Very important. Drivnod doubles the trigger and each trigger will require the payment. Fortunately, Skull Clamp isn't that problematic since we'll draw 4 cards for free. Viscera Seer and Woe Strider are free sacrifice outlets that at least help us filter the top of our library to improve our draws. The Scry isn't doubled, but at least they are free sacrifice outlets on useful creatures. Phyrexian Arena and Black Market Connections are non-synergistic and to-the-point card draw effects in the deck. Yes, Black Market Connections does it better, since you can also create a treasure and a creature token that can be used as sacrifice fodder. But Phyrexian Arena is still good to run here. War Room and Reliquary Tower don't take up slots, and even though the tower doesn't draw us cards per se, it helps keep our fat hand when we have our engines doing their thing. War Room is great because it only costs us 1 life to activate. Pawn of Ulamog, Sifter of Skulls, Pitiless Plunder, and Revel in Riches are synergistic ways to accelerate our mana by creating tokens on death triggers. Triggers that are doubled thanks to our commander. The first two in particular are amazing because these Eldrazi tokens have a built-in sacrifice outlet that can not only further fuel our mana needs, but also our Aristocrat effects. Revel in Riches presents itself as another alternate win con for the deck. Keep in mind that this triggers twice, so if we had each opponent sacrifice a creature, we get 6 treasure tokens. This thing gets out of hand very quickly. Black Market also gets a ton of counters very quickly since it's essentially 2 at a time. These counters are also great to proliferate, which is why Karn's Bastion is in the deck. It doesn't take up a slot here, so being able to sink our mana to get more counters is good enough, even if not frequently used. Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar are possibly the best mana sources in the deck though, since they're also free sacrifice outlets. Phyrexian Altar in particular has the potential of going infinite with Gravecrawler and another zombie as I mentioned earlier. With a life drain effect, we can win the game in that same turn if uninterrupted. Bantu's Monument, Jet Medallion, Defiler of Flesh, and Kirik, Son of Yawgmoth are the deck's non-synergistic ways of reducing the cost of our spells. Kirik takes it a step further by also letting us pay life for activated abilities too, if they had black mana cost. Kirik also has the potential of being a beater in the deck since he grows for every black spell we cast. Bantu's Monument is yet another way to life drain the table, essentially for free just by casting black creatures. Wayfarer's Bauble, Burnished Heart, Canoptic Wraith, Sword of the Animus, and Sword of Hearth and Home are land-based ramp effects, which is better than artifact-based or creature-based effects because such a vast majority of players refuse to run mass land destruction spells. The Ulk and Wraith are amazing in this deck because they ramp with a built-in sacrifice outlet. When we have our Reanimation effects, we can continuously get basics land out of our decks, of which there are 20 basic swamps. This is especially important since the deck is obviously running Cabal Coffers, Cabal Stronghold, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, and Ancient Tomb. The first 3 lands have the potential to tap for an insane amount of black mana, so they do a ton of work here. Same with Cryptghast and Nekarna Revenant. Being able to tap our swamp for 1 more black mana is amazing. As a bonus, Cryptghast having Extort means we can life drain for 1 extra mana when casting our spells. Nekarna Revenant is yet another beater since we can sink our black mana into it to pump it, or life if we have Kirik. Horborg Tomb of Yawgmoth makes them and the previous lands even better since it turns all lands in play into swamps. Like I mentioned, the deck is running 20 basic swamps, but being able to turn all of our lands into swamps without taking up a slot on the deck pretty much makes Urborg an auto-include here. Same with Soul Ring. The commander still costs 5 mana to cast the first time, so we still need all the help we can get. But you can swap this out for Mana Vault, Mana Crypt, Jewel Lotus, or Dark Ritual if you wanted to. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Drivnod Carnage Dominus. While Drivnod is an amazing commander for a mono-black Aristocrats deck, the deck isn't 100% dependent on it. Sure, it's a 3-turn clock on its own with the potential of being indestructible, but if you never cast the commander in a game, you can still use all of the synergy in the deck to win. Drivnod just makes it way faster since it's doubling those death triggers. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Bedded Kirby, and happy brewing.